Alina was 22 when the strange events began. She had recently moved into a small, quiet apartment above an old bakery that smelled like fresh bread every morning. It was the kind of place that felt cozy at first. One narrow hallway, a bedroom with a big window, and a living room that echoed slightly when it was too quiet. She was a freelance designer, spending most of her time at home, curled up on her couch with her laptop, a blanket, and a mug of coffee that was never quite full. Her routine was simple: wake up late, work during the afternoon, and take short, evening walks to the nearby grocery store just to stretch her legs. Life was calm, if a little lonely. But one chilly evening, something changed. As Alina walked back from the store, with a bag of snacks in one hand and her headphones playing soft music in the other, a strange feeling crept up her spine. She slowed. Her steps took out one earbud and glanced behind her. The street was empty. Completely. Not a car, not a person, not even a dog. She stood there for a moment, heart tapping just a little faster than usual. There was no sound except the soft rustling of tree branches in the cold wind. She laughed it off, shaking her head, and kept walking. But the feeling didn't leave her. It stayed all the way to her front door, like a shadow she couldn't see. The next morning, she found a note under her door, a small piece of white paper, folded once. Her name wasn't on it. There was no signature. Just one sentence written, in black ink. "You looked beautiful in the red hoodie yesterday." She stared at the words for a long time, her breath caught in her throat. She had, in fact, worn her red hoodie the day before. It was her favorite, the one with a tiny coffee stain near the wrist. The only people who could have seen her were a few strangers on the street. No one had spoken to her. No one had even looked her way. At least not that she noticed. She sat down slowly on her couch, the note still in her hand. The apartment felt colder than usual. Her windows didn't have curtains yet. She had told herself there was no need. After all, she was 3 floors up, and who could possibly see in? But now, that thought didn't feel so comforting. That day, she didn't work much. She kept checking her phone, peeking through her peephole, listening to every small sound in the hallway outside. That single note turned her world upside down. It wasn't the words that scared her the most. It was the realization that someone, somewhere, had been watching, closely enough to know exactly what she wore, and silently enough that she hadn't even noticed. And that was just the beginning. The silence in the apartment grew heavier with each passing day. Alina tried to return to her usual routine, but something had shifted inside her. The note had planted a seed of fear that refused to leave. Every sound now seemed louder. Every creak in the floor, every gust of wind against the window. She barely slept that night, her thoughts looping around the message and the idea of unseen eyes watching from somewhere close. Morning light didn't bring much comfort. Instead, it brought another message. Slipped under the door once again was a second note. This one was smaller, as if torn from a page in a hurry. The handwriting was the same, neat but strange, almost too careful. The words chilled her more than the first. "Don't be scared, I'm just watching over you." There was something deeply disturbing in the way it was written. Not a threat, not even a demand. Just a calm, soft statement from someone who believed their presence was harmless. But it wasn't. It felt like a shadow clinging to her skin, something invisible that wouldn't leave her alone. The walls of the apartment, once warm and familiar, began to feel like they were closing in, holding secrets in their corners. Later that afternoon, Alina bought curtains. Thick, dark ones that blocked out every inch of the outside world. She closed them tight, locked every door, checked the windows twice, and still felt exposed. Her phone remained beside her constantly, screen glowing with unread messages from friends she had suddenly stopped replying to. Trust was beginning to fade from her heart. How could someone walk around her life so silently, so closely, and go unseen? That evening, she noticed something else. The window in the bathroom, which faced the alley behind the building, had been unlocked. She clearly remembered locking it days ago, right after she moved in. Her hand trembled as she pushed it shut, again locking it with force, then pulling the shower curtain closed like a weak shield against whatever might be outside. Nighttime became unbearable. Were welcome in her world. The second note hadn't just scared her, it made everything around her feel wrong. For the first time, she started to wonder if the person knew more than what she wore. Maybe they knew her schedule. Maybe they had been inside already, had stood quietly while she slept or showered or laughed at some late-night show. That kind of fear isn't loud. It whispers. It crawls into the bones, sits in the chest, and grows. By the end of that night, Alina understood something deeply unsettling. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't someone playing games. This was someone real, someone obsessed, and they were getting closer. Days passed, and the world outside kept moving, but inside that small apartment, time felt like it had stopped. Alina barely stepped outside anymore, only leaving when absolutely necessary, and always returning with her heart pounding and her hands gripping the keys like a weapon. The third note came quietly, like the others, slipped beneath the door in the early hours when the streets were still asleep. This time it read, "You smiled in your sleep. It was beautiful." That line shattered whatever strength remained in her. Sleep was no longer safe. Somewhere, somehow, someone had seen her in the most vulnerable state, unaware, unguarded, and completely alone. That knowledge hit harder than anything else. Fear was no longer just in her mind. It had become real, something breathing just beyond the safety of her walls. The apartment building itself began to feel unfamiliar. It had only 4 floors, narrow hallways, and one old elevator that groaned every time it moved. It wasn't a busy place. Most tenants kept to themselves, their doors shut and lives quiet. But that made it worse. There were only a handful of people who came and went. One of them had to be the one watching. One of them had to be leaving the notes. And now, suspicion crept in like smoke. Every footstep in the hallway made her heart jump. Every knock at a neighbor's door made her freeze and listen. Then, one night, something happened that broke the silence in a different way. Around midnight, while the wind outside howled and the building creaked like it always did, a faint sound echoed in the hallway. A slow, dragging step. Not the kind of sound made by someone casually walking to their door, but something slower, heavier. Alina turned off the television, heart thudding, and stood near her door, listening. The footsteps stopped directly in front of her apartment. Silence followed. She stared at the door, not breathing. A moment later, the doorknob rattled gently. Not twisted, just touched, like someone was testing it. A soft tap followed, once, twice, then nothing. Her phone was already in her hand. She didn't dial. She didn't call for help. Instead, she stood frozen, staring at the door, waiting for it to move again. But it didn't. After a minute, the dragging sound returned, fading down the hallway until it disappeared. Only when silence returned did she dare to peek through the peephole. The hallway was empty. No sign of anyone. No note this time. No figure walking away. Just stillness. Morning felt surreal. The world outside her window glowed gold with sunlight. People walked by on the street like everything was normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. That night had changed something. The idea that the stalker might have been standing just inches away separated only by a thin wooden door, was too much to forget. Now, the fear wasn't just about being watched, it was about being hunted. And, deep inside, a single question repeated like a heartbeat. How much longer before the door opened? The morning after the hallway incident, a strange quietness settled over the apartment. Not the usual peaceful kind, but something heavy, like the air was waiting. Alina barely touched her breakfast. The milk sat untouched. Her toast went cold. Her eyes kept drifting to the front door, half expecting it to creak open on its own. The night replayed in her mind again and again. The soft rattle of the doorknob, the quiet taps, the dragging steps fading into the dark. She had always thought of her apartment as her safe place, but that illusion was gone. Every corner now held questions. Every shadow whispered doubt. And worst of all, the stalker still hadn't shown a face. Later that day, rain began to fall. It started as a soft drizzle, then turned into heavy drops beating against the window glass like impatient fingers. The sky outside turned gray, and the streets emptied. Alina sat curled up in her blanket, watching the water slide down the windows, trying to find comfort in the storm. It was the first time she had relaxed, even slightly, in days. Thunder rumbled in the distance. She reached for her mug, lifted it to her lips, and then something shifted in the corner of her eye. Her breath caught. Just outside the window, behind the curtain, was a shape. Not clear, not detailed, but unmistakable. A silhouette. A face. Pressed lightly against the glass, as if trying to peer inside. The windows were 3 floors above the street. There was no balcony, no ledge to stand on, just empty air. Yet the face was there, still, expressionless, and far too close. Her body froze. The curtain, slightly open, moved gently from the wind outside. Slowly, she stood up and stepped back. Her hands trembled. Her mind raced to explain it. Maybe a trick of the light. Maybe her own reflection. But deep down, the truth settled in. Someone had climbed up. She didn't dare move closer. Instead, she reached for her phone and held it tightly, fingers struggling to type the emergency number. But by the time she found the courage to approach and pull the curtain back fully, the face was gone. Just rain remained. Nothing outside, but the wet glass and empty air. No one on the fire escape, no one below. But the foggy imprint of a forehead and 2 faint marks where eyes had pressed against the glass were still there. Real. Solid. Chilling. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat with her back against the wall, facing the door, watching the window like it might open on its own. Her apartment, once so small and cozy, now felt too big, too open, too exposed. No place felt safe anymore. The stalker wasn't just watching. He was getting bolder. The door had been tested. The window had been touched. There was no more guessing. He wasn't far. He was close. Too close. The next morning came with the same thick, choking fear that had become part of everyday life. Every movement inside the apartment felt like a risk. Alina had reached a point where even the sound of her own footsteps startled her. The memory of the face in the window refused to leave her mind. She avoided the curtains entirely now, choosing instead to keep the apartment sealed in artificial light. The outside world, even through glass, no longer felt safe. For hours, she sat in silence, phone in hand, debating whether to call the police again. But what could be said? A face with no proof, a doorknob that jiggled, notes with no fingerprints. Even she had begun to question if her fear was building monsters where none existed. But deep inside, the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. And then something strange happened. While searching for her charger behind the TV stand, she noticed something unusual wedged between the wires. It looked like a small button, barely bigger than a fingernail, with a tiny hole in the center. At first, she thought it was part of the TV setup, something left over from the cable technician's visit weeks ago. But when she leaned closer, a terrible realization set in. It was a camera. A small wireless one, carefully hidden and pointed. Straight at the couch, her blood ran cold. That wasn't something a stranger could have placed through a window or a door. That had to be planted from inside. The panic was instant. She tore the camera out, threw it across the room, then started searching. Every drawer, every closet, every hidden corner became a battlefield. In the vent above the kitchen, she found another one. Near the smoke detector, a third. One was tucked inside a small hole behind the bookshelf. 3, 4, 5. How long had they been there? Days? Weeks? Had someone been watching her this entire time? Watching her eat, sleep, cry? There was no space in her mind for anything but fear now. Everything felt touched, invaded. The apartment wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to someone else. Someone silent, someone patient, someone obsessed. Her hands shook as she called the police. This time, there was no hesitation. Officers arrived and began checking the apartment. They confirmed the cameras were real, well hidden, and professionally placed. One of them looked genuinely disturbed. But without fingerprints, without footage, without a name, there wasn't much that could be done. They asked questions about recent visitors, neighbors, anyone suspicious. But no clear suspect emerged. That night, she didn't stay in the apartment. She packed a small bag, locked the door, and left to stay at a friend's place. The weight of the keys in her pocket felt useless. The stalker had already been inside. He had touched everything. He had taken her privacy and twisted it into something terrifying. And though the cameras were gone, the feeling remained. Eyes were still on her. Somewhere out there he was watching, and he was far from finished. A week passed in hiding, each day a blend of silence and dread. The friend's apartment offered shelter but no real peace. Sleep came in short, broken moments, and even during the day, the feeling of being watched crept like a shadow behind every thought. Alina avoided mirrors, windows, and phones. The police had promised an investigation, but updates were slow, and reassurance came in tired voices and careful words. Something about the quiet made things worse, because the stalker, whoever he was, had also gone silent. No more notes, no messages, no strange faces in the dark. But the fear didn't fade. It only grew deeper, like a string stretched too tight, waiting to snap. Then one morning, something changed. The bathroom mirror fogged up after a warm shower. Nothing unusual, until a shape began to appear in the steam. At first, it looked like a smudge, but then the letters became clear. A name. Her name. Written in the condensation as if someone had traced it with a finger from inside the glass. A scream rose in her throat and she stumbled backward, hitting the sink with her hip. The steam swirled, and the writing faded, but the message remained. He had found her again, even here. The apartment's locks were checked. The friend confirmed no one had come or gone. But something felt off. The writing had been placed carefully, waiting for the steam to reveal it. That meant the stalker had been there before she even arrived. The thought twisted her stomach. Every time safety felt near, he was already one step ahead. The police were called again. They dusted the mirror, checked the bathroom, asked more questions. Still, no solid evidence appeared. They suspected the person had access to both apartments, hers and this one. A maintenance worker, maybe. A neighbor. Someone who blended in easily. A name was finally mentioned. One of the maintenance staff, a quiet man who had been working in the building for months, suddenly stopped showing up a few days ago. No calls, no resignation, just vanished. His record wasn't clean. A warning from a past job. An incident that had been buried in paperwork. When his name was said aloud, a chill spread through the room like ice. The picture they showed was of a plain man with tired eyes and a crooked smile. She didn't recognize the face, but something about it made her chest tighten. Suddenly, memories began to piece together. A glance in the hallway, a soft greeting by the elevator. Moments dismissed as harmless, now painted in a darker shade. He had been there all along, watching, waiting, blending in. And now he was gone, disappeared into the city's endless crowd. The silence that followed was worse than noise. At least when the stalker made himself known, there was something to hold on to, even if it was fear. But now, he had vanished into shadows again, leaving behind only one truth. He was still out there, and he wasn't finished. Days turned into weeks, but the fear never left. Even in public, safety felt like an illusion. Every stranger's face became suspicious. Every glance in a crowd felt loaded with meaning. The police had searched for the missing man, the suspected stalker, but no trace had been found. No sightings, no calls, no credit card activity. It was like he had simply dissolved into thin air. Alina had stopped staying in one place for too long, moving between friends' apartments and hotels, never letting a pattern form. She avoided routines, never took the same route twice, and never returned to her own apartment. That place, once filled with warm light and familiar things, had become a memory soaked in terror. Everything felt like it was on pause. Life, laughter, sleep. It all waited for the nightmare to truly end. But it hadn't. Because one thing lingered, silent and steady, the feeling of being watched. One night, after weeks of running, she decided to stay in a small motel just outside the city. The room was plain, cream-colored walls, a squeaky bed, and heavy curtains. The kind of place people stayed when they wanted to disappear. She double-checked the lock, placed a chair under the doorknob, and made sure every window was shut tight. The room smelled like old cigarettes and dust, but at least it was quiet. Too quiet. No traffic, no hallway noise, just the steady hum of the old heater. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Then a sound broke the silence. 3 slow knocks. Not loud, not urgent, just firm and patient. The kind that didn't need to be repeated. Her blood turned to ice. She didn't move. She held her breath. The chair under the doorknob didn't shake. The lock didn't rattle. But the knocking returned. 3 knocks again, slower this time. Like a whisper against the door. She crept toward the peephole, heart thudding so loudly she could barely hear. What she saw made her legs weaken. No one stood outside. The hallway was empty. She backed away, shaking, grabbed her phone and started dialing the police. But before the call connected, a soft piece of paper slid under the door. Just one word, written on it, in shaky handwriting. Found. Panic surged through her like lightning. She bolted from the room, barefoot, leaving everything behind. Phone, bag, everything. She ran through the hallway, past the front desk, into the cold night, screaming for help. The motel clerk called the police. When they searched the room, no one was found. No footprints in the hallway, no fingerprints on the note. But the paper was real. The knocking was real. And the fear. That was the most real thing of all. The stalker was never caught. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of night, she still hears those 3 knocks in her dreams. Always slow, always steady, a reminder that no matter how far she runs, he had once found her, and maybe one day, he will again.